Ottercats and Kearney show that technological change and automation increases demand for skilled workers. But at the same time, technology replaces these routine middle skilled jobs. This creates labor market polarization. So high skill wages rise, middle skilled jobs shrink. So there's fewer jobs in those professions. And low skilled workers face some downward pressure on their wages, but there's still large employment in those fields. Now, a common concern in this literature is that automation may also reduce intergenerational income mobility. So if parents experience large wage shocks from automation, they may invest less in their children's education and their opportunities for the future. So some of the missing pieces of this analysis is thinking about labor market institutions specifically, really, really narrowing in on these. That's why I included this reading from Geloso, Plemons, and Sharma. And their key insight is that the impact of automation may depend on the specifics of labor market institutions. So most of the automation literature implicitly assumes that there's a frictionless or a very low friction labor market where displaced workers in one profession or one industry can move into new occupations or new industry. But in reality, there are frictions, and these frictions differ across professions and across industries. So it's important to account for that. A big cause of these frictions is occupational licenses. Occupational licensing can create barriers like education programs that you have to meet before you can work, experience you have to gain under a licensed professional before you can obtain a license, passing exams and background checks, things like that. Now, these barriers may prevent displaced workers from quickly switching occupations. Morris Kleiner talks a lot recently about how licensing reduces job churn and movement into licensed professions from unlicensed professions because of these barriers to entry that they create, the long time it takes to meet licensing requirements before you can move into a new job. So here, the authors test whether occupational licensing amplifies the negative effects of automation on income mobility. So they combine a few different data sets, a measure of automation exposure across US commuting zones, data on changes in occupational licensing regulations across states over time, and third, measures of intergenerational income mobility. Their key empirical question is, does automation reduce mobility more in places with stricter occupational licensing, where these labor market frictions make it more difficult to move into a new occupation if you've lost your job or if there are threats to losing your job because of automation? Now, their results show three important patterns. First, automation reduces income mobility. So this aligns with some of the past work. Areas with greater exposure to automation experience lower upward mobility over time. So we have less rags to riches mobility and a higher persistence of income across generations. This is consistent with the broader automation literature, which is important in the first step to find the same thing that past work has found. They also find evidence that occupational licensing reduces mobility. States that expanded licensing requirements saw lower upward mobility and reduced opportunities for low-income workers. And again, this supports earlier research showing that licensing restricts entry into occupation. It's the grit in the gears of the economy, as Kleiner likes to say. Their third finding is that licensing amplifies the negative effects of automation. So their most important finding here is an interaction between licensing and automation. So automation is much more harmful for economic mobility in places with more licensing laws and stricter licensing regulation. When states deregulated occupations, the negative effects of automation were drastically smaller. This was a large economically significant finding. In some estimates, deregulation mitigated roughly half to upwards of 80% of the negative mobility of the effects of automation. So the main lesson here is that technological change alone does not determine labor market outcomes. Institutions shape how workers adjust. Shocking, I know that two George Mason economists would say that institutions matter. But if workers can easily move into new jobs, automation may cause short-term disruption, but long-run opportunity and improved economic outcomes. But if regulations block entry into new occupations, technological changes can lead to longer-lasting inequality and reduced mobility. Now, I also included work that I've done on income inequality and occupational licensing here, consider that more of a of an optional reading. Um, that's main finding and the purpose of that paper is to dig into the long run effects of occupational licensing on the changes and the trends of income inequality over long periods of time. It kind of complements this work by Geloso, Plemons, and Sharma, but it's not something that you need to read to replace it for this course or what we're talking about here.